Hello, is this Mark Mitchell?
Yeah.
This is Brooke Anderson. I'm new with the IT department. We're just making updates to your account and need to grab your password. Do you have that handy?
Yeah, let me get that for you. Sorry, I know I shouldn't, but you guys make us change our password so often, I forget, so I wrote it down. Here it is. Capital M, mean cat, 1965.
Give me just a sec here. So tell me, Mark, did you grow up in the area?
Actually, no. I'm from Denver, Colorado. How about you?
Born and bred in the area. And Mark, just so we can confirm it's you, do you mind answering a security question?
Sure.
What did you want to be when you grew up?
I used to want to be a botanist. Is that correct?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mark. We'll get those updates, okay?
Okay, great. Thanks.
Welcome to the Cybersecurity Series. I'm so glad you joined us today. If any of you find yourselves looking for a better place to hide your password Post-it note right now, let me reassure you, you're not alone. But stick with us. I think you'll have a better idea about passwords and other authentication methods by the time we're done today. We'll be taking an insider's look at identity and access management, what industry professionals refer to as IAM. Hence the title to today's episode, which probably had some of you wondering if I needed some help with my spell check. Identity and access management is all about how we prove who we are when we access our networks and devices, and how those networks and devices decide what we should be allowed to access once they have verified our identity. Because this is such a broad topic, today we will primarily focus on the identity authentication piece. To help us with that, we have two great cybersecurity professionals from Cisco's Duo Security who will tell us about their jobs and the interesting work Duo Security is doing. Then, we'll learn more about passwords before going in depth with current technologies like multi-factor authentication and zero trust principles. After sharing some sage advice, our guests will pass along some great career advice before we wrap up with a live Q&A session. So please, feel free to enter your questions into the chat as we go along. With that, let's introduce today's guests, Jeff Dooley and Micah Wilson. Jeff is a cybersecurity specialist at Cisco focused on the needs of government and education customers. He has 18 years of experience in the tech industry, including disaster recovery, data center migrations, virtualization, and creating effective cybersecurity strategies. Micah is the Public Sector Sales Engineering Manager at Duo Security, where he leads a team that architects secure and policy-compliant solutions for authentication. He has over 20 years of cybersecurity experience, including prior roles in pen testing, continuity of operations planning, and certification and accreditation testing of government systems. Gentlemen, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, fantastic.
So let's take a few minutes hearing about the great jobs that you have and some of the really cool stuff that Duo Security does. Jeff, I'd like to start with you.
Sure.
Your title is a cybersecurity specialist. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is that you do?
Yeah, so we look at not just physical security. I think that was what we used to do. We're focused really around securing the end user, securing applications, And especially in this digital world and where we hear a lot about cloud and SaaS and all these things that are happening, how do we protect those? And so we spend a lot of time focused on that.
You are right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Now I have a question. I noticed that your title says cyber security and it's split into 2 words, just like the title for this series that we're doing right now. Some people are a 1-word cybersecurity, all run together. Some are 2. Where do you land on that?
I've heard it depends on which side of the pond you're on. So in America, I hear it's cybersecurity separated. So I've chosen that as my title.
Okay, you're taking a stand. I like
am,
it.
yes.
Micah, over to you. Your title is a bit of a tongue twister, I have to say. Public Sector Sales Engineer Manager. Have you ever tried to say that 10 times fast in a row?
I try not to say it at all, but we run out of card stock when I print my business cards, so yeah.
So tell us what you do for a living.
So I have the privilege of getting to put together a very talented team of engineers. We go and we look at the federal government's networks, we look at state and local and education facilities like this, and we design systems that not only will provide, the type of security you would expect for secure institutions, but also that are policy compliant, and then because the public sector piece, that we protect the taxpayers' dollars. This is all of our money, as we're all citizens here. So as that money gets spent with federal grants or with, for large government organizations or branches of the military, that we're doing the best that we can as good stewards as well.
As a taxpayer, thank you for being a good steward of my few pennies that I throw into the pot. Thanks for that. Your jobs demonstrate what we're increasingly seeing, and that is that cybersecurity really is a broad category of professional opportunities. And we'll get more into that, and of course at the end have some career advice from you guys. Thanks for sharing what you do day to day.
Sure.
Now let's talk a little bit about Duo and the exciting work that they're doing. And I'd like to start with the title. Who came up with Duo Security? Is there any significance there?
So there is, and the funny thing is too, about 5-6 years ago, if you went to duo.com, it was a shoe store. But Duo is fantastic for the fact that we are the second thing. So primary authentication, whenever you throw in a username and password or use a smart card or something of that nature, that is typically pretty baked in an organization. And you'll see sometimes in the IAM conversation, like you mentioned, that as we work on trying to figure out how to identify people and then make them prove who they say they are, having something like Duo that comes in after that primary authentication is important. So we literally are the second thing. What we do is baked in the name. You did something to get authenticated, now we are going to make you prove you are who you say you are. So that's the significance of Duo, and it's as easy as it can be.
Yeah,
Not to be confused with a lot of the other organizations out there, like the Language app and some of the other things that are going around. So yeah.
Yeah, there are a few others with the same name. I like that. And Jeff, I think you said, we talk about username and password being the first line of defense. I think you're the first face often that customers and clients of Duo see. And do you find that people come clamoring for Duo or multi-factor authentication, or do you have to kind of educate them on what multi-factor
it is education.
authentication is?
I think it comes to a lot of times compliance requirements. It might be insurance. It might be, maybe it's a government compliance requirements, but a lot of times that drives the initial conversation. At the same time, I think as a security professional, we all know that we need to secure more than just having a password. It's about the application. And so that's where Duo really comes in. It's focused around the application. It's proving to what Micah said, that we are who we are, but it's really about making sure the application is secure and those people accessing their applications.
Yeah, those are great points. And we're certainly going to talk more in depth about passwords and multi-factor authentication. Micah, I think you mentioned there are, you were talking about the name Duo, but when you started talking about it, it made me think there are a lot of folks offering different flavors of multi-factor authentication right now. In a nutshell, what is it that makes Duo distinct or special compared to a lot of the other applications?
Yeah, and that's a great question too, because what Duo does that's super unique in the industry is that we do not offer an identity solution. We work in conjunction with any identity solution that might be provided. So whether it's the incumbent solution that already exists in your organization and you're looking to move to something else that's cloud-based later or something of that nature, we'll work for what you have today and then help you step into that future as well. But if you actually look at the very basics of what Duo does, what makes us unique is we manipulate the authentication workflow very simply to pause the auth process and then insert that opportunity to prove who you say you are. And then I believe later in the conversation, some of the components of what's called zero trust architecture in the industry. So,
which we're going to talk about in a few minutes.
Yep.
Glad you brought it up.
Yep.
So we've spent a little time getting to know you, getting to know Duo, and the word password just keeps coming up.
Yep.
So I think that's a great segue into today's learning segment, where we're going to learn a little more about passwords. Let's go ahead and watch that together.
Why do we care so much about passwords? Because, paired with your username, your password is the last line of defense, which determines whether or not you are allowed access. If someone can easily guess or crack your password, they can easily gain access to your network. What makes a password easy to guess? We compiled a list of common passwords. Do you see any passwords that would be easy to guess? If you spotted any, chances are you're right. To prove our point, we entered them into some common password checkers that estimate how long they take to be cracked. We'll show you the results in a few seconds. What makes a password secure? In general, the longer the password, the more secure. Once a password reaches at least 14 characters, the time required to crack it starts growing exponentially. Security also increases with the addition of numbers, special characters, and randomness, or what security professionals refer to as entropy. In general, the farther away your password gets from words in a dictionary, the better. Industry experts recommend the use of passphrases rather than passwords, since they make your password longer while still easy to remember. For example, using my sister Susan's name as a password will result in a weak password, even if I substitute a $ for the capital S and I add 123 exclamation point after. Those help, but only very slightly. But if Susan Lucia Brown was born on April 12th at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta, and Grandma gave us a lot of money to help buy diapers, chances are that Susan will graduate college, have a successful career, a wonderful family, and donate to her own granddaughter's diaper fund before someone can crack that passphrase. The password strength checker estimated it would take 2 billion years to crack that one. But what could make them more secure? The use of multi-factor authentication, usually referred to as MFA or sometimes 2FA. MFA complements passwords by adding an additional layer of defense in the form of a hard token or a soft token installed on your phone, which continuously generates a new number that you must enter to gain access. Or MFA sends you a text message with a code that you must enter within a short period of time to gain access. MFA only adds a few seconds to your login process, but the additional security it provides is well worth the time. How did your office passwords fare? If you saw any of your passwords near the top of that list, it's time to change them. Let's review some password best practices. 1. Long passwords are better than short passwords. 2. Use passphrases rather than passwords. 3. Use numbers, symbols, and entropy to your passphrase. 4. The less your passwords look like words in a dictionary, the better they are. 5. Don't reuse passwords. Use a unique password for each different account. 6. Anytime you can implement multi-factor authentication, you should definitely do it.
That was a great learning segment. There was one password on the list that I didn't see that I have found to be very useful. It's my Disney Plus password, the one that my grown kids keep texting me and asking me what the password is. So I just changed it recently. I changed it to "get your own account" with an exclamation point. And like the learning segment just said, I think it's long enough to count as a passphrase, and I capitalized the G and I put the exclamation point on the end. So we'll see how it works. So I do want to talk a little more in depth about MFA as well as zero trust, but since we just heard a lot about passwords. And as I think you said it earlier, Micah, it's really the combination of the username, which is usually super easy to guess because, well, it's our name.
Or on a business card.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And our password, that's that first line of defense. Are we ever going to get to a place where we just don't use passwords anymore, since they are the thing that's compromised over and over and over?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing an escalation. it was always the case that passwords were phishable, or if you wrote them down, somebody could, or shoulder surfing, all of the classic things. They're just intrinsically something that you can accidentally give away. And so what we're seeing now is the tokenization of access. So we're starting to tokenize things, and at the point where we're carrying around a literal computer in our pocket that has a biometric reader on it, it's fairly low-hanging fruit to see that the phone be used as that, or even crazy things like, hey, can I use my fancy car key that I pushed the button and I said, can I use that as my token to sign into my accounts for my my social media and for my shopping and things of that nature. So we are seeing a vast change, and a lot of that also is based on the fact that we need trust in the internet now. There's so much misinformation that we're starting to see that, for one person to be able to trust another person, we need to move away from passwords that are just so easy to compromise. And then we're also seeing kind of an escalation in the types of MFA that's available as well, and I'm certain we'll talk about that some more too.
It's almost like you were reading my card here,
well,
because
right.
Passwords, first step, and as you talked about, Duo helps us remember.
It's a
MFA
very natural path.
Is the second step.
Yeah.
And we've heard for a long time about kind of three main categories when we talk about identity and access management. Something you know, something you have, and something you are kind of those three big categories. Where does MFA fit in? Well, I guess, so passwords are something you know, generally, unless you're the guy in the video who has to write it down. And where does MFA fit into that?
So MFA is the notion that I'm going to do something using those things. And MFA is not even just for people. I mean, if you think about MFA and the Internet of Things, computers talking to computers, I have a sneaking suspicion that if we can create some sort of switch where make sure that as computers talk to each other, that a human can cause it to have to do an MFA event, then we can stop the future of Skynet or something like that, where as the machines talk to each other. But it literally is like, think of it as actuating a lever. I am actuating a lever, and somebody is actually looking and seeing that it is me that is actuating that lever. And the way that you prove that it's you can be many different things. It could be an SMS, a text message, a code that you type in off of a token. It can be all the way up to something that you are, facial recognition, Face ID, or a fingerprint on a fingerprint reader. But they're absolutely not all created equally. And what we're seeing is an escalation in the types of attacks that are occurring that is going to drive that tokenization that we talked about. And the final outcome of that is passwordless. I mean, there's no escaping it. That's where we have to get as a society.
Yeah. And at the end of this segment, we'll talk about your ideas on kind of what the future brings for us. We hear the term zero trust or zero trust principle, zero trust model. Can you, in a nutshell, kind of summarize what that is?
Yeah, so it is really the idea of you always need to verify. You're never trusting completely, you always need to verify, and it is a process. So somebody doesn't just wake up one day and say, our organization now is zero trust. So, certified. There's not really a way to do that. So it is a series of going through a series of events where you're trying to protect what you have. You're looking at inventory and assets, so you know what you have. But it is this idea that I don't want to trust anything unless I've verified what it is. And so it goes back to, I don't trust you unless you can prove that it's you.
And it's a very interesting architecture shift too. By that little pause that I told you about of the network authentication workflow, it allows you to do something that's super unique that we haven't seen as an architecture change in this industry in probably 20 years. We now have the ability, instead of complying to connect to the network and then doing microsegmentation, we now have the ability to comply to connect to the application, have the user prove it is them with that MFA event, and that comply to connect, think of it as must be this tall to ride the roller coaster. Get the posture of the device, make sure that the user has completed a complex multi-factor event that we trust and meets the risk of the application that they're getting into. And moving away from that architecture of comply to connect to the network means that we can use the web browser as our executable to get to everything. Yeah. Our iPhones or Android phones are notionally just little front web ends to get to all of these things. Right. And now we start moving away from these VPN architectures and things of that nature to everything's HTTPS, everything's web-based. Now we just have to comply to connect to that application, and you can have a sliding scale of risk of what type of MFA that you want to be able to use.
Is it fair to say in zero trust, All right, folks, this might be a surprise. I'm probably older than all of you. But when I was young, I used to go to Disneyland. You paid your admission to get in, and you got this little passport booklet, and it had so many tickets. There were different colors, and it was Frontierland, Tomorrowland, whatever it was. And you know, when you ran out of tickets for that place, you couldn't ride those rides anymore. And of course, nowadays, you pay one bargain price to get into Disneyland, and then essentially you've been authenticated to the whole park. And it seems to me Zero Trust is sort of going back to that old passport model where, okay, we're going to authenticate you by paying something when you walk into the park entrance, but then every ride you want to go on, there's a process of, are you allowed to ride this ride or not? Is that kind of where we're getting with Zero Trust?
That is exactly what it is, because you're moving away from where you're coming from, and that is the zero part of Zero Trust, is that we're going to make no assumption about where you come from or how you're connecting. We're going to assess that at the time of access. And further, as we talk about the future, we're going to be able to, if your risk profile changes, while you have access, be able to remove access as well.
Yeah, great. So
you
are kicked off of this ride.
Right. If you misbehave on Space Mountain
Yeah.
and you're making, sticking your tongue out at the cameras as it's taking pictures, you're no longer allowed to ride Space Mountain.
Okay, great. Now I understand. Thank you for that one. So you mentioned biometrics before too, and that's clearly the something, we talked about something you have, something you know, something you are. That's clearly the something you are element. Very difficult to replicate. But I wonder, and I'm curious on your opinions about this, it almost seems to me that biometrics is really just a very complex password, in that it's hard to fake it or to guess what it would be, but underneath the hood, it kind of behaves like a password would.
Yep.
There's a hash or a token or a ticket that's generated, hopefully securely, hopefully it's transmitted securely, hopefully it's validated securely, but still it's a whole bunch of ones and zeros, just like a password is converted into. So even though biometrics produces a level of complexity in that first line of defense, does that mean that MFA still has a role to play there?
Yeah, well, I'd say a couple things. We always weigh this, the decision to be convenient versus secure. And so really what we do when we look towards Zero Trust is, how do we make sure that it's convenient enough for somebody to log into, but it's secure? So we're not negotiating on security piece, but we're making it easier for someone. So biometrics is essentially make it easier for us to obtain that information, so we know it's them. We know it's that person or that application they need to get access to. So it is balancing between the two. As IT professionals, as we all know, that's a difficult thing to balance.
Yeah.
And the dangerous game about biometrics too is it's the attackers are out there. If you start making centralized repositories of biometrics, that is a very big target, because the one thing that we know about biometrics, unless violence is involved, you cannot revoke the biometrics, the way that your eyes are designed, the way that your fingerprints work, and things of that nature. So the thing about biometrics is that it is not in and of itself an MFA event. What you do with your biometrics is you unlock the ability to submit something on your behalf, something like a keying information or something of that nature, so that you're completing some sort of cryptographic exchange. But to pull that lever that I talked about earlier, you're actuating with something that you are. And that's fantastic, because with the devices that we carry around today, that's stored locally to the device and enrolled locally to the device. And if you are providing those devices as an enterprise to your customers and use some sort of device management to prevent other devices from being enrolled, now you've got a nice closed walled garden where you can let the users use something that's incredibly convenient and they're used to using all the time anyway.
Yeah.
Good point.
I hope there's some real professionals listening today, because you're getting some great advice that usually people have to pay for. So
Yeah.
I appreciate all this information you're sharing with us. I think 2 more questions, and then we probably need to move on with the show. We use Duo here at WGU, and every time I log onto the network, almost every time, I think it gives me a grace period of a couple of days based on my risk profile and everything else. But said, hey, comes to my phone, is it really you? There's a login from some geolocated place, and click yes or click no. So there are always the naysayers who say, okay, fine, but how secure really is that? Because, well, I could SIM swap you, or I could clone your phone. So
Sure.
what do you say to those folks?
Well, and really, to your point, there are different ways to authenticate, and there's different risk behind each one, and so there are more secure ways to authenticate. So we oftentimes see things like SMS and callback. That's not maybe the best way to authenticate. It's not the most secure. Where other forms will be, things like biometrics or even a push is more secure than that. So you do have to weigh that out, and what we want to give people really is ability to have flexibility. So from an administration side, you can decide on how Paul should be authenticating based on your risk, or how Micah should be authenticating. So, but there are different degrees of risk when you authenticate. But really, we've got a few where I'd say, make it simple for yourself and narrow down to the ones that are going to be the most secure for the organization.
Great point. I think, Micah, you gave us a hint on this earlier
Yeah.
because you said, for example, when you're browsing to your social media account or whatever, that's maybe kind of a low risk entry level sort of layer of security. But if it's the codes to the nuclear missiles that you happen to be carrying around,
the way the industry talks about it is phishing resistance. So there's replay resistance and phishing resistance. And phishing resistance is unique. Just like we have the slow heat death of the universe, we're seeing the slow heat death of certain types of authenticators. So, working with public sector, I work a lot with National Institute of Standards and Technology. So you guys will have heard of NIST and FIPS and all these government jargon. So what they do is they actually come out with guidance to industry as well as the federal government, and they've restricted for some time telephony. So the text messaging, the phone calls back. We're starting to see some of that happen with one-time passwords, be they time-based or event-based, because what's happening is the users are being phished. There is not a cryptographic exchange. That tokenization has not occurred, and so you'll go and you'll sign in, and then you'll immediately be dumped to what you expect, a page that says, now insert your one-time password. And now they have both pieces of information. They have a scripted engine once they have both pieces of information that will allow them to use the information within the time that is allotted and then slam them into the application.
Perfect.
Yeah. So
seems like you've been around these for a while.
Yeah, I've seen a few things, and so now we're seeing that tokenization, and we're seeing the drive to stronger MFA. But as Jeff mentioned, the risk of all applications always do MFA. You could notionally have everybody's password be password, and that's a poor man's tokenization of MFA. As long as you're doing something to make people prove that who they are, they say they are, but you need to look at the authenticator that you're using, because the reliability, the phishing resistance gets better as you get into those.
Yeah, great. Balancing the solution to the
the
requirement,
risk.
really. That's great.
And by doing it application by application, you can keep your costs down.
Sounds great. I'm sold. So listen, let's move on to our Sage Tips section.
Okay.
And we call it Sage Tips because, in case you didn't know, at WGU our mascot is Sage the Night Owl. And so a little bit of a play on words there with Sage Tips. But let's go ahead and cut to that segment. And this is where I'll use this. Okay, gents, for today's Sage Tips segment, we're going to put your inner play-by-play commentary skills to the test. So you have the magic box here.
Mike is a
Micah.
driver today.
Your hands are at the control.
All right, I've got
Drive
the
carefully.
I've got the magic box.
There's no seat belts here.
Yeah, no seatbelts.
On the monitor over here, and I think folks watching the broadcast can just see what's on the monitor, this is the segment of who is becoming a really unfortunate soul in these video clips that does everything seemingly wrong. So what I'd like you to do is just take a couple of minutes, walk us through this segment, and tell us what maybe could have been done differently to prevent some of the bad things that happened.
Absolutely. So I'm going to hit play here, and we're going to see this young gentleman sitting at his desk as he takes a phone call, and this is the way it always goes down. So first and foremost, I'm going to go ahead and say he's taken a phone call that could notionally be on his personal phone. It may not be his work or desk phone, so that's the first kind of hit that we're seeing there. That okay, I've got a phone call. It may or may not be work.
Okay.
Being able to actually vet that who the person is that's calling you, I think, is incredibly important.
Okay. I think I saw unknown.
Unknown,
on the
I was going
caller
to say.
ID.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay,
And
let's keep going.
Hello, is this Mark Mitchell?
Yeah.
This is Brooke Anderson. I'm new with the IT department. We're just making updates to your.
So this is a little bit of trust phishing, and so there are some very scary people that are also white hat hackers and stuff like that. So this is I've actually seen this done live before on one of the morning shows by a young woman named Kelly Shortridge, who in real time on that program did exactly this type of hack. She led with a piece of information that she knew. She asked a name, and it was a correct name. And then she gave a premise in order to be able to set the
And
stage
need to
for
grab
the
your
social
password.
engineering
Do you have
attack.
that handy?
Yeah, let me get that for you.
And then
Sorry, I know
immediately
I
it
shouldn't,
went for the
but
password,
You guys
catch
make
him
us
off
change our
guard.
password so often, I forget. So I wrote it.
And then do you want to
This-
talk about this?
Well, and you know, we see, especially when we go see people, different customers, we see this all the time. Where you'll see there's there's a sticky pad or a sticky note, and it's got the password written down. So one, that should never be exposed to anyone, or if you have your own password file, saved on your desktop, also something you shouldn't be doing.
So yeah, written and posted. Most of the time, it's on the bottom of the keyboard.
And sometimes, to his point, either you're making us change it so often, or these things are so complex, there's no way I can humanly remember this.
Yes. So, and again, too, as I hit play, you'll see
just a
the
sec
young lady
here.
here. She already has in her possession
So
the username of the account. So she's just seeking the password. Username typically comes on as an email address that shows up on your business card. Also, it could be included the phone number that was dialed. So all the necessary information for name, phone number, email address was right there.
Tell me, Mark, did you grow up in the area?
Actually, no. I'm from Denver, Colorado. How about you?
Born and bred in the area. And Mark, just so we can confirm it's you, do you
So security questions are useless.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'll make the bold statement that
Okay.
if you're currently using security questions as a trust-based system, and we'll talk about this a little more later, but the ability to build trust into a network or a system is not based on a piece of information that you have in your head. We have to get to the tokenization of access.
Okay.
And there, to that end, the industry at large is actually trying to move away from that. Banking industry is the one that's historically notorious for this, and as we saw at the end of the hack, that's exactly what she's after. She's
Sure.
What did you want to be when you grew up?
She's after his banking
I used
information,
to want to-
and kind of running through to get logged in there and back up here to his bank.
Yeah.
But the super interesting thing that you see immediately after that is the fact that she has a spreadsheet here, as I jog forward, of different names, who they are, what their roles are, and is collecting those passwords because password reuse is a bane to every enterprise's existence. And that's why I go back to what I said before. If you can tokenize access, that's fantastic. But if you can't, then if you can insert strong MFA, everybody's password can be password. National Institute of Standards and Technology says that you no longer need to do 45, 90, 120-day password changes if you have strong MFA in place. And that in itself could pay for an MFA solution from the help desk calls that go away.
I forgot my password.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I just entered it 3 times and now I'm locked out.
Well,
Right.
and I do think the banking industry has moved that direction, like you're saying, and that's that whole idea of I want to be able to confirm using my phone is much better than I want to confirm using my password.
Yeah.
And this is happening every day. And this is before we get to the point where we have gas that costs so much where people will just come to you and say, hey, I'll give you a candy bar if you'll give me your password. or even worse, for somebody that might be an admin in your organization, $3 to $5 grand. At a recent talk I was with FBI, one of the key attacks is directly contacting people and offering them money to betray their organization. And we're starting to see more and more attacks that are just, hey, will you sell out?
Yeah, great. Well, not great, but great info. How about that?
Scary.
All right, thanks for that. And you may have a future in play-by-play. There you go, guys.
I don't know about that.
Yeah.
For our final segment today, I'd like to ask you some career advice questions. I think we have a little entry thing here, and then we'll move on to it. So thanks for your willingness to pass along some career advice, because you guys collectively have a lot of years in this business. And I have glanced over at the monitor here a few times as some of the questions have been rolling in, and a lot of them have to do with how do I get an entry-level help desk job, or how do I move up in this? So I think those are great starting points for us. Jeff, let's start with you. What advice do you have for someone who just wants to get into the security
Well, I think
profession?
it's just getting in. I think, and part of it is being agile, because the careers that we're going to see in the next 10 years, they probably don't completely exist now. So we're seeing where, yes, security is important, and we're trying to make sure that we can do those secure things, but we're not sure what to secure in 5 years. That will change. So being agile enough, and I think also being able to almost create your own role if you've been there long enough, because you can identify those secure risks. And that's what it comes down to, being proactive. Once you get that first initial role, being proactive with security is very important.
Thank you. I also, tell me if you think I'm wrong. Don't be afraid to tell me if you think I'm wrong. I think agility is important, but I think also not losing sight of what's happening under the hood, because a lot of the things that we see that come and go are really just us interacting with the system, those interface type things that are getting more convenient, more faster as we go along. But still, it's bits and bytes, and it's tokens and hashes that are being passed. So I do think there's a fundamental learning and then applying that in an agile fashion to the differences in the interfaces.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. I think it's important to understand really what we're the foundation we're trying to build on, right? And it's not just based on a trendy new software that came out. So it's got to be a holistic view of things. The other thing I would add is that now we're at the point where we can start to specialize more than ever before. So you have these security specialists that are really specific around a certain area. It could be, maybe it's forensics. Maybe they spend most of their time in the SOC, right? But it's that idea that you can be you can't go from just, you can be a generalist, but you can be very specialized, which I think is ultimately where do you want to be?
Yeah, sure. Great. Not everybody is a pen tester.
Yes.
Right.
Surprise. All right. Micah, so there are a lot of folks who are in the IT industry or even in cybersecurity, and they want to move into management. I think I saw the word manager in your title, in your tongue twister of a title. What advice do you have for them?
So it definitely was, and I think it actually kind of breaks up into three parts. And before I go into the three parts, just this, there's not enough of us. If you have the desire, that's the first piece. If you have the desire, the self-learning is super important. You start spending time with it. You start working on the just that willingness to learn. Then mentorship. Find people that are in the industry, spend time with them, figure out what they've done, kind of like this conversation, and then education, what you all are doing. In order to be able to support the management, there also are required business skills that a lot of the, you think of the pen testing, the hackers, the dark knights and the hoodies and the purple hair and the tattoos. We're out here. They're out there. Early in my career, there was probably some things that I had to make decisions about. Do I want to do this in a non-extradition country, or do I want to be a professional? And I decided I'm going to study, I'm going to work, I'm going to learn some of the business skills as well. So you cannot ignore the organizational skills and the basic skills that go along with being able to manage people, being able to communicate. Yeah. And so that combination of the three things, I think, is what in the end makes a good manager, that desire, strong desire and passion. The ability to find mentors and never quit, always learn, work with the people around you. There's always somebody smarter in the room. And then finally, a proper education, especially in this day and age, to be able to show that you've got those chops to handle the business piece.
Yeah, it's great advice. Thanks. Tech skills kind of get you in. Soft skills get you farther.
Yep.
Agreed.
Great. Before we jump to a couple of questions, one more question. I happen to know both of your formal academic preparation was not in cybersecurity, partly because, well, it didn't exist the way that it does now. Jeff, I think yours was business.
Yes.
And Micah, yours was biopsychology.
Yep.
And so for those coming into cybersecurity from a different perspective, other than I went to a school and got a cybersecurity degree and whatnot, what do you think are the big technical hurdles that they kind of need to overcome when they get into this field? Briefly, because we're got to move to some questions.
Well, part of that is you kind of walk into a new field and everything's new. It's overwhelming. So I think you just have to. I think one is the ability to always think learning and self-study, and so that's a big factor. Is we never stop learning, which makes this industry so exciting. Yeah. And if we just stopped and there was no more learning, it wouldn't be fun. So I think that's a big factor. Is just constantly learning as we go. And even if you're not technical yet, you can become technical if you want to.
And a strong desire to break things. I think, as you come into this with desire, and especially in cybersecurity, the way that you learn things, how they work, is you take them apart and you put them back together again. And I studied biopsychology, and that was systems. You can't do that with people. The computers you can. So don't be scared to play. Build your lab. Jump in and just kind of try to figure out what is the fun thing that I can do this week. Go spend time on Twitter, look and see what everybody else is doing, and just have fun with it.
Yeah, great. I think a couple of keys that you guys both mentioned: curiosity and just jumping in and having fun with it. I think those are great.
And in the end, it turns out that you can have fun, and it's a great gig.
Yeah, great. I get paid for this?
Yeah, exactly. I think that all the time.
Great.
That's also why cybersecurity is rife with imposter syndrome. And so we see a lot of that. People that are like, it's not like a lawyer or a doctor. There's so many, it's just such a new career that a lot of people feel like they're playing house.
Yeah, or that I don't think I know enough to really do this.
Right.
They might be surprised at how much they actually know.
There's just very few people out here. So
Yeah.
yes, we need you. Do it.
Yes, great. And these guys are probably hiring somebody.
All the time.
All right, we've had a lot of great questions come in. Have time for just a couple. One goes back to what you said before. You can't revoke biometrics. Somebody asks the question, what if my biometrics are compromised? Can you actually compromise biometrics?
A lot of states have made central repositories that go along with their driver's license and things of that nature, and we know of at least 2 or 3 that have gotten hit and lost those. That's why it's important to actually have the biometrics key something and not be the actual event. So yes, you cannot revoke biometrics, and that's a great question. People need to understand that better.
Yeah, great.
Good point.
Somebody asks, should I trust the strong password recommendations that sites autofill when I create an account? What do you think?
I think it's got to be personal to you anyway, because if not, you're going to be resetting again and again if it's a password.
Yeah.
So making sure it's a strong password, but it's got something that you're going to remember is so important. If not, you're going to run the same problem. You're always resetting.
And we talked about
that's an
pass
issue.
phrases, something that's
Yeah.
easy for you to remember,
Yeah.
but it gives the length and the complexity.
Yeah.
Or you throw caution to the wind and say, I don't care. Password is my password because I have
Right.
multi-factor authentication.
The thing I see the most with the passwords and the auto-generated passwords is they're complex. You don't remember them. You're on a device that you can't copy and paste it. Your password manager is not on it, and so you end up going back and making a simple password anyway. So I think the convenience of it, unless you're really good at using your password manager, the goal really is consumer products now. The tokens that are out there to use with social media and things of that nature, and most modern applications will give you the ability to turn on some sort of MFA, and then just use whatever password you want that's easy to remember. I mean, it's terrible advice, and I hate to say it out loud, but even use the same password on everything.
That's terrible advice,
It's terrible
Micah.
advice,
I'm
but-
not going to let that one stand.
But
here.
MFA and tokenizing access is the way.
Okay, awesome. A question that I saw pop up earlier, what's the difference between IDS and IPS? I think we're talking about intrusion detection and
versus
intrusion
protection.
prevention.
Right.
And that's one sounds an alarm, the other one actually does something to
Yes.
cut it off.
Correct. And so if in the real world space, the kinetic responder, changing a routing table, dropping a user for the IPS, where you're actually doing something as opposed to detection and monitoring. But it's the same thing too. We see in this industry phishing campaigns that enterprises run. Really, it's the notion of pulling the fire alarm and then seeing who dies. It's better. It's better. Whether it's a drill or not. Those types of tests are not teaching the right thing. So what we really needed to spend time on instead is cryptographic exchanges. Intrusion detection will always be important. Intrusion prevention doesn't prevent insider threat, and that's a whole different ballywick, if that's the word.
We'll do another episode.
Yeah,
on that.
So it's a little bit of a sidestep from the conversation today that is a whole different conversation. Yeah.
Great. We have a lot of questions. All right, I am going to ask one more. Your guys' opinion. It's got to be quick.
Okay.
What do you think about password managers?
I think today we need them until we can move towards passwordless, yes, but I think it's nice and it does add a level of convenience. Again, we're keeping the lock and key separate.
Yep.
So if we can do that, then we really, that eliminates a lot of the risks that we have.
And still put
provides
MFA on top of that.
Yes.
First line of defense, password manager probably helps you toughen that up with complexity in your passwords and not having to remember them or post-it note it. But then always
Which
the
is
second
exactly
line of
what we
defense.
do internally at Cisco
Yeah.
here today, right? We do have a password manager, but then we also have MFA on top of that. Yeah.
Great. I said last one, but there is somebody out there that's tricky. They said, so what's the username for your Disney Plus account? I see you out there.
We will sell that later.
Somebody wanting to watch
I
that
think
Kenobi.
you know my kids. All right, Jeff, Micah, thank you so much for being with us today. I think we could have spent 3 days on
Yeah,
these topics.
I do.
And thanks to each of you for joining us. We will be back with another episode on September 14th. The title of that episode will be Incident Response, also known as, oh no, now what are we going to do? We'll have another great guest with another cool company that they work for who will share all kinds of information for us. Until then, now would be a good time to check that password Post-it note, and for heaven's sake, enable multi-factor authentication.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having
See you
us.
next
Thanks,
time.
Paul. Yeah.
That was a practice run.
Yeah. That was fun.